The scent of 1,000 white roses threatened to suffocate me. It was a sweet, cloying perfume that clung to the heavy satin of my dress, a gown that had taken 6 months to design and a lifetime of dreams to imagine. Each tiny pearl sewn into the bodice felt like a lead weight, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious effort. From my vantage point in the small antechamber overlooking the grand cathedral, I could see the guests filtering in, a river of pastel silks and dark, formal suits. They were a testament to the union of two of the city's most influential families. My own, built on generations of academic and artistic achievement, and the Vanderbilts, a name synonymous with old money and unshakable power. My soon-to-be husband, Michael Vanderbilt, was the heir to it all. Our love story was the kind that tabloids adored, the artist's daughter and the corporate prince. We met at a charity gala, a whirlwind of champagne and stilted conversation, until our eyes locked across the crowded ballroom. Michael wasn't like the other men in his circle. He had a kindness in his eyes, a genuine warmth that seemed at odds with the cold, calculated world he inhabited. He saw me, not just as a pretty accessory or a strategic alliance, but as Olivia. He loved my paint-stained fingers, my chaotic studio, and my tendency to quote dead poets at inconvenient times. He was my anchor, and I, his escape. My maid of honor, my best friend Sophia, fussed with the gossamer veil, her reflection in the gilded mirror a mask of serene excitement. "You look ethereal, Liv," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, like something out of a fairy tale. A fairy tale, that's what it was supposed to be. I smoothed down the front of my dress, the fabric cool against my trembling fingers. Where is he? He was supposed to be here 20 minutes ago. A nervous laugh escaped me, probably struggling with his cufflinks. You know Michael. Sophia's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Probably. The groom is allowed to be fashionably late, I suppose. But my unease was a living thing, a coiled snake in the pit of my stomach. It had been there for months, a low thrum of anxiety beneath the surface of wedding plans and blissful engagement parties. Its source had a name, Eleanor Vanderbilt, Michael's mother. From our first meeting, Eleanor had regarded me with a thinly veiled disdain. She was a woman carved from ice, her compliments laced with poison, her smile a weapon. She'd appraised me over tea in her palatial drawing room, her eyes lingering on my hands, my dress, my family history. An artist, she had mused, the word sounding like an unfortunate diagnosis. How? Quaint. She spoke of bloodlines and legacy, of the sacred duty the Vanderbilts had to maintain their purity. I was a beautiful but ultimately unsuitable, variable in her meticulous equation. Michael had always assured me she would come around. "She just needs to get to know you, my love," he'd say, kissing away my worries. "Once she sees how happy you make me, nothing else will matter." He was wrong. Another 10 minutes crawled by. The organist, who had been playing a soft prelude, now began to cycle through the same piece for the third time. The guests were shifting in their pews, their polite murmurs starting to sound strained. My father, a man whose gentle composure I had always admired, poked his head into the room, his face a mask of forced calm. "Everything all right, pumpkin. The bishop is getting a bit antsy." "Michael's just running late, Dad," I said, my voice higher than I intended. Sophia shot my father a look, a silent plea. He nodded grimly and retreated. "I'm going to go see what's going on," she announced, her tone now brisk and businesslike. She squeezed my hand, deep breaths. "I'll be right back." The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the silence in the room became a roaring vacuum. I walked to the window, peering down at the sea of faces. I saw Richard Vanderbilt, Michael's father, standing near the front pew. He looked uncomfortable, tugging at his collar, his gaze darting towards the cathedral entrance. Unlike his wife, Richard had always been kind to me. He was a quiet, almost melancholic man who seemed burdened by the weight of his own name. He once confessed to me, after 2 glasses of scotch at a family dinner, that he'd dreamed of being a historian, but family duty had called. He saw a kindred spirit in me, I think, someone who valued passion over pedigree. Where was Eleanor? I scanned the front row. Her seat, next to her husband's, was conspicuously empty. The snake in my stomach tightened its coils. It knew. The universe was holding its breath, and I was at the epicenter of a storm I hadn't seen gathering. The minutes stretched into an eternity. 15 became 30. 30 became 45. The murmurs from the cathedral below grew louder, morphing from confusion into palpable tension. My own heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of denial. This isn't happening. He loves me. He wouldn't do this. Then the door opened. It wasn't Sophia. It was Jason, Michael's cousin and best man. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of pity and terror. He couldn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on a spot on the marble floor just to my left. He held a single, crisp envelope in his hand. It had my name on it, written in Michael's familiar, elegant script. "Jason, what is going on? Where is Michael?" My voice was a shard of glass. He swallowed hard, extending the envelope like it was a venomous snake. I am so sorry, Olivia." The world tilted on its axis. My fingers, numb and clumsy, refused to work. I fumbled with the seal, my breath catching in my throat. The paper inside was thick, expensive stationery, the Vanderbilt crest embossed at the top. The note was short, brutally so. "Olivia, I can't do this. I'm sorry, it's for the best." "Michael." That was it. No explanation, no flowery prose, just a guillotine severing our past, our present, our future. The snake in my stomach struck, flooding my veins with ice-cold venom. I felt nothing and everything all at once. The weight of the pearls, the scent of the roses, the stares of 1,000 guests, it all crashed down on me. What does it say? Sophia was back, her face ashen. She must have seen Jason arrive, must have known. She tried to take the letter, but my hand clenched around it, crumpling the edges. "He's not coming," I whispered. The words felt foreign in my mouth. He left me. Humiliation was a physical force, a hot wave that washed over me, threatening to pull me under. I could hear the cathedral emptying out, the sound of shocked whispers and hasty departures echoing up to my lonely tower. My fairy tale had become a public spectacle. The artist's daughter, jilted at the altar by the Vanderbilt heir. I would be a headline, a cautionary tale, an object of pity and scorn. Jason was still standing there, looking utterly miserable. "My aunt," he began. His voice cracking. "Alina," she said. "She said what?" I demanded, my voice raw. "She said your blood wasn't pure enough for the Vanderbilt line, that she couldn't let Michael dilute the family legacy." He finally met my eyes, and I saw a flicker of the Vanderbilt arrogance there, warring with his shame. He believed it. On some level, they all did. Blood, the word hung in the air, grotesque and obscene. For all their wealth and power, it came down to something so primal, so futile. My family, with its Nobel laureate grandfather and my mother's celebrated career as a concert violinist, wasn't good enough. My blood, which carried the legacy of poets and professors, was deemed impure by a woman whose only accomplishment was marrying into money. The initial shock began to recede, and in its place something else took root. It was a cold, hard rage, unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't the fiery, explosive anger of a woman scorned. It was a glacial fury, slow-moving and immensely powerful, carving new, dangerous channels through my soul. They thought they could discard me like a flawed piece of art, humiliate me and my family, and simply walk away. They thought their name, their legacy, was inviolable. And in that moment, I remembered something. A secret, not my secret, but theirs. A secret I had stumbled upon by accident months ago and had, out of love for Michael and a naive sense of decency, buried deep in my mind. It was during a weekend at the Vanderbilt country estate. Michael was in meetings all day, and Alina was, as usual, otherwise engaged. I was left to my own devices. I'd wandered into the vast, dust-moated library, a room Richard rarely let anyone enter. He called it his sanctuary. I was running my fingers along the spines of ancient books when I noticed a large, leather-bound portfolio tucked away on a bottom shelf, almost hidden behind a set of encyclopedias. My curiosity piqued. I pulled it out. It was a family scrapbook, but older than any I had ever seen. The photographs were sepia-toned and fragile, the faces in them stern and unfamiliar. I flipped through the pages, tracing the Vanderbilt lineage back through the Gilded Age, the Civil War, all the way to their supposed arrival in the New World. It was a history lesson in avarice and ambition. And then I saw it. Tucked into a sleeve at the very back of the album was a photograph that didn't seem to belong. It was a picture of a young woman, beautiful and defiant, with startlingly familiar eyes. She was holding a baby. On the back, in faded ink, was a date from the late 19th century and a short inscription. "My sweet boy, Jonathan, may you never know the shame of your father's name." Beneath it, in what I recognized as Richard Vanderbilt's own handwriting, was a small, shaky note. "Jonathan Croft, the true beginning." I had been confused, but an hour later, hidden in the local historical archives I accessed on my phone, the pieces fell into place. The official Vanderbilt family tree, the one displayed proudly in their grand hall, listed their patriarch as a man named Augustus Vanderbilt, a supposed shipping magnate. But the census records and birth registries from that era told a different story. They spoke of a wealthy industrialist named Harrison Croft and his scandalous affair with a housemaid. An affair that produced an illegitimate son, Jonathan. Harrison Croft had died without a legitimate heir, and his vast fortune, through a series of legal machinations and backroom deals, was eventually passed to his unacknowledged son. But to claim it, to wash away the stain of his birth, Jonathan Croft had taken the name of a distant and conveniently deceased cousin, Vanderbilt. The entire Vanderbilt legacy, their pure bloodline that Alina guarded so zealously, was built on a lie. They weren't Vanderbilts at all. They were Crofts, the descendants of an illegitimate child. The name they revered, the source of all their power and prestige, was a stolen one. At the time, I had felt a pang of sympathy for Richard, for the burden of the secret he so clearly carried. I pushed the photo back into its sleeve, placed the album back on the shelf, and never spoke of it. It wasn't my story to tell. But they had just made it my story. "Get out," I said to Jason, my voice dangerously quiet. He flinched and practically fled the room. Sophia rushed to my side. "Liv, what are we going to do? I'll call your parents. We'll get you out of here before anyone else sees you." "No," I said, a strange calm settling over me. The tears wouldn't come. My grief had already crystallized into something harder, something sharper. I pulled out my phone, its screen a stark, bright rectangle in the dimming light of the antechamber. My fingers moved with unerring precision, my mind clear and focused. A few months ago, on a whim, I had taken a picture of that old photograph and the inscription on the back. A historian's habit, I'd told myself. Document everything. Now I saw it for what it was, ammunition. I found the image in my gallery. The defiant eyes of the housemaid stared back at me. I saw her shame, her love, and her anger. I felt a kinship with this woman from a century past, another woman wronged by the arrogance of a powerful family. Sophia watched me, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Liv, what are you doing?" I opened my messaging app and selected a single contact. Richard Vanderbilt. My thumb hovered over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. Michael had chosen his family, his legacy, his pure bloodline over me. He had allowed his mother's bigotry to destroy us. They wanted to humiliate me, to erase me from their perfect narrative. But I had the power to erase them. I attached the photo. My message was simple, direct, and devastating. "I believe you know what this is. Your wife seems to place a great deal of importance on the purity of a name. It's a shame the Vanderbilt name isn't really yours to begin with." I hit send, and in the ensuing silence, I listened for the sound of an empire beginning to crumble. The delivered receipt under my message felt as final as a tombstone ceiling. A profound, unnerving silence followed, broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart. Sophia stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes wide with a dawning comprehension that was quickly turning into alarm. "Liv, what did you do? Who did you send that to?" "The man who should have been my father-in-law," I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the seismic tremors shaking me to my core. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching a character in a film, a woman who looked like me, wearing my dress, holding my phone, but whose actions were driven by a cold, unfamiliar logic. The grief was still there, a howling void in my chest, but the rage had formed a protective shell around it, a crystalline armor of pure, unadulterated fury. "You can't be serious," Sophia breathed. Grabbing my arm, Her touch was meant to be grounding, but I felt a million miles away. "Olivia, this is the Vanderbilts. You can't just—" She was cut off by a sudden commotion from the cathedral below. The disorganized shuffling of a departing crowd morphed into something else entirely. A wave of agitated murmurs rolled through the vast space, followed by a sharp, commanding voice that I recognized as the bishop's, attempting to restore order. It was a futile effort. The sound of a heavy door slamming echoed up the stone walls. My phone buzzed in my hand, a reply from Richard Vanderbilt. It wasn't a message. It was an incoming call. I let it ring, the sound sharp and piercing in the quiet room. Each buzz was a confirmation. The bomb had landed. The fuse was lit. "Are you going to answer that?" Sophia whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "No," I said, a slow smile touching my lips. It felt alien on my face. "He can wait." I silenced the call and placed the phone face down on a velvet-covered chaise lounge. Let him stew in the panic. Let him feel a fraction of the powerlessness I had been subjected to just moments before. The power had shifted. It was no longer in the hands of the groom who had fled or the matriarch who had judged me. It was here, in this room, in the palm of my hand. The door to the antechamber burst open, not with a gentle knock, but with the force of a battering ram. It was Alina Vanderbilt. Her face, usually a mask of icy composure, was a mess of fury and disbelief. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair was slightly askew, and a vein throbbed in her temple. Her eyes, the same cold blue as her son's, locked onto me, burning with a hatred so potent it was almost tangible. "What have you done?" she hissed, her voice a low, venomous growl. She advanced on me, her silk dress rustling like dry leaves. "You pathetic little gold digger. You think you can threaten us? You think some dusty old photograph means anything?" Sophia stepped between us, a loyal if terrified guardian. "Mrs. Vanderbilt, I think you should leave." Alina shoved her aside with surprising strength. "This is between me and this gutter trash my son almost made the mistake of marrying." She was inches from my face now, her expensive perfume warring with the scent of the roses. "Richard is having some kind of fit, babbling nonsense. He showed me your phone, a picture of some peasant woman. It's meaningless. You have nothing." I met her gaze without flinching. The armor held. "It's funny you should mention peasants, Alina, because that peasant woman is the true matriarch of your family. Her name was Amelia Croft, and her son, Jonathan, was the founder of everything you hold so dear, not Augustus Vanderbilt. That name, your precious name, is nothing but a lie you've been telling yourselves for over a century." The color drained from her face. For the first time since I'd met her, the mask of superiority cracked, revealing the raw panic beneath. She knew. Perhaps not the details, but she knew the foundation of her world was built on sand. Richard had clearly confessed enough in his panic. "You're lying," she whispered, but the conviction was gone. "Am I?" I picked up my phone, my movements deliberate and slow. The census records from 1880 are public domain. So are the birth registries. Harrison Croft, one of the wealthiest men of his time, never had a legitimate heir. But he did have an illegitimate son with his housemaid. A son named Jonathan. A son who, through some very clever and likely illegal maneuvers, inherited a fortune and an identity that didn't belong to him. Your bloodline isn't pure, Alina. It's stolen. She stared at me, speechless. The full weight of my words seemed to land on her, crushing her composure, her arrogance, her entire sense of self. Everything she had built her life upon, the snobbery, the obsession with legacy, was a farce. Just then, Richard Vanderbilt appeared in the doorway. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. His face was gray, his shoulders slumped. He leaned against the doorframe as if his legs could no longer support him. He ignored his wife, his eyes finding mine. They held a terrifying cocktail of emotions, fury, despair, and a sliver of something that looked like respect. "Alina, get out," he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. "Richard, this whore is." I said, "Get out," he roared, a sound so primal and full of pain that it silenced her instantly. He had never raised his voice to her in my presence. She stared at him, shocked, then her gaze flicked back to me, full of venom. She turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The room was quiet again, save for our ragged breathing. Richard pushed himself off the doorframe and walked slowly towards me. He stopped a few feet away, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What do you want, Olivia?" he asked, the words heavy with defeat. "What do I want?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "An hour ago, I wanted to marry your son. I wanted a life with the man I loved. I wanted a family. But your wife and your son made it very clear what they think of me and my family. They made it clear that love and happiness are secondary to a name. A name that, it turns out, is a complete and utter fraud." I walked over to the gilded mirror and looked at my reflection. The ethereal bride Sophia had spoken of was gone. In her place was a woman I barely recognized. Her eyes were hard, her jaw set. The pearls on her dress looked less like decorations and more like armor. I began to unfasten the tiny buttons at my wrists, my movements precise. "I have been publicly and deliberately humiliated. Richard," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the room. "My family has been insulted. And the man who swore to love and protect me abandoned me at the altar because his mother whispered poison in his ear about my blood. You don't get to ask me what I want as if I am some petulant child demanding a toy. You are going to listen to what I demand." He just stood there, watching me, his face a grim mask. He knew he had no choice. "First," I said, turning back to face him, "this wedding is not canceled. It is annulled. And you will be the one to make the announcement. The reason for the annulment will be irreconcilable differences based on the discovery of gross misrepresentation of family heritage. You will use those exact words. The world will not see me as the jilted bride. They will see me as the woman who walked away." He flinched, the public relations nightmare already spooling out in his mind. But he nodded. "Done." "Second," I continued, feeling a surge of power. "You will issue a public apology. Not to me. To my parents. You will apologize for the insult to their name and their legacy, which, unlike yours, is genuine and earned. You will state that their heritage is one of honor and distinction, and that any suggestion to the contrary was baseless and deplorable." His jaw tightened. This was a deeper wound. An admission of his family's inferiority in the one area they claimed supremacy. That is a private matter. It became a public matter the second your son left me standing here, and your guests started whispering, I retorted. It will be a full-page statement in every major newspaper. Non-negotiable. He looked away, staring out the window at the city his false name had helped build. After a long moment, he gave another curt nod. Fine. I took a deep breath. This was the final, devastating blow. This was the one that would not just end the wedding, but end the Vanderbilts as the world knew them. Third, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more weight than a shout. Your family name is Croft. You are not and have never been Vanderbilts. The legacy you've built, the power you wield, the name Alina worships is all predicated on a lie. And the lie ends today. You will begin the legal process of reverting your family name to its original state. You will all become Crofts. You will strip away the lie and live in the truth. Your pure Vanderbilt bloodline will cease to exist, because it never existed in the first place. He finally looked at me, and I saw a flicker of sheer, unadulterated terror in his eyes. This was more than a PR scandal. This was an existential threat. This was the complete and utter destruction of their identity. You can't ask that, he whispered. That's impossible. It would destroy everything. The company, our standing, our history. Your history is a lie, I cut in sharply. I'm not asking you to destroy it. I'm asking you to correct it. Your ancestor stole a name to hide his shame. It seems only fitting that his descendants should reclaim their true one to pay for your arrogance. I held up my phone. Or I can simply send this photo, along with the census records and a very compelling narrative, to every major news outlet in the world. I am an artist, Richard. I know how to craft a story. Imagine the headlines. The Vanderbilt Empire, a century of lies. I wonder what that would do to your stock prices, to your precious legacy. He was trapped, a wild animal caught in a snare it never saw. He looked around the ornate room, at the gilded furniture and silk wallpaper, as if seeing it all for the first time as the flimsy stage said it truly was. Suddenly, the door creaked open again. It was Michael. He stood there, still in his wedding suit, his tie loosened, his hair a mess. His face was a wreck of confusion, guilt, and fear. He had clearly been summoned by the chaos, perhaps by his frantic mother. He saw me in my wedding dress, a bride with no groom. He saw his father, looking like a broken man. Olivia, he breathed, taking a step towards me. I can explain. Can you? I asked, my voice devoid of any warmth, any of the love I once felt for him. It was as if I was speaking to a stranger. Can you explain why you're a coward? Can you explain why you let your mother's bigotry dictate your life? Or can you explain why your name is a lie? His eyes widened, darting from me to his father. What is she talking about, Dad? Richard didn't answer. He just stared at me, his mind racing, calculating the cost of defiance versus the cost of submission. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken history and imminent ruin. The choice was his. Preserve the lie and face total, public annihilation at my hand, or begin the slow, painful process of dismantling his own world to save what little was left. The fate of the Vanderbilt name, of his entire family, rested on his next word. Michael's question hung in the air, a monument to his own ignorance. What is she talking about, Dad? His eyes, the same shade of blue I had once found so captivating, were now just pools of bewildered weakness. He looked from his father's shattered expression to my own granite composure, a man adrift in a sea of consequences he couldn't comprehend. Richard Vanderbilt, or rather, Richard Croft, finally tore his gaze away from me and looked at his son. The look wasn't one of fatherly comfort. It was one of profound, soul-deep disappointment. She's talking about the truth, Michael, he said, his voice a dead weight. A truth I should have told you years ago. The truth about what? Michael pleaded, taking another step into the room. Liv, please, just talk to me. We can fix this. I made a terrible mistake. I should have stood up to her, I should have. You should have been a man. I cut in, my voice cold and sharp as the edge of a diamond. But you weren't. You were a puppet, and your mother pulled the strings. And now the show is over. I gestured between him and his father. Hell explain it to you. Hell tell you all about your pure bloodline and the housemaid it came from. Hell tell you about the stolen name you've been hiding behind for generations. I turned my back on him, a definitive, final gesture. My focus was on Richard. My terms are not negotiable. You have 24 hours to release the first 2 statements. The legal petition for the name change must be filed within the week. My lawyer will be in contact with yours to confirm. Olivia, wait, Michael begged, his voice cracking. The sound grated on my raw nerves. I could feel the ghost of the love I had for him, a phantom limb aching with memory, but the reality of his betrayal was a tourniquet, cutting off all feeling. I didn't turn around. I addressed Richard. Get him out of my sight. Richard seemed to find a final, depleted reserve of authority. Michael, that's enough. Go downstairs. Go find your mother. We have things to discuss. But Dad. Now, Michael. The broken command was enough. Michael faltered, then retreated, casting one last, wounded look in my direction before disappearing through the doorway. The click of the closing door was the sound of the final nail being hammered into the coffin of our relationship. You have my word, Richard said softly, his voice heavy with the ashes of his pride. It will be done. It's not your word I trust, I replied. It's your terror. I walked over to Sophia, who had been watching the entire exchange with a mixture of awe and fear. I took her hand. Let's go. Where? She whispered. Anywhere but here. I didn't look at Richard again. I didn't need to. I could feel his defeat radiating off him in waves. We walked out of the antechamber, leaving him alone with the ruins of his legacy. The main cathedral was mostly empty now, save for a few straggling guests and the frantic wedding planners who were scurrying about, unsure of what to do with 1,000 white roses and no bride. A hush fell as we emerged. All eyes turned to me. The whispers were instant, a rustle of silk and speculation. I could see the pity in some faces, the morbid curiosity in others. They saw a woman in a magnificent white gown, a bride left standing at the altar. They thought they knew my story. They were wrong. This was not an ending. It was a coronation. I held my head high, my spine straight. My rage had forged a crown on my head that they couldn't see. I met their stares, one by one, my gaze unwavering. There was no shame in my eyes, no hint of tears. I let them look. I wanted them to remember this moment. Let them gossip. The truth, when it came out, would be far more scandalous than anything they could possibly imagine. The train of my dress, a masterpiece of lace and silk, trailed behind me like a burden. It felt heavy, a relic from a life that had died an hour ago. Halfway down the main aisle, I stopped. In a single fluid motion, I gathered the voluminous fabric in my hands, and with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I ripped it. The sound of tearing silk echoed through the cavernous space, a shocking, violent counterpoint to the sacred silence. Gasps rippled through the remaining onlookers. I let the severed train fall to the marble floor, a puddle of discarded dreams. Now, in a gown that was still beautiful but undeniably broken, I felt freer. I continued my walk, not as a bride, but as a warrior leaving the battlefield. Sophia was at my side, her hand a steady presence on my arm. "Your car is still out front," she murmured, her voice a lifeline. My parents were waiting for us on the grand cathedral steps, their faces etched with worry. My father, normally so calm and professorial, looked ready to commit murder. My mother's eyes were filled with a deep, aching sadness for the pain she knew I must be in. "Olivia, my sweet girl," my mother began, reaching for me. I intercepted her hug, holding her by the shoulders instead. I needed to stand on my own. "I am okay, Mom. I am okay." "Okay, he humiliated you. He humiliated our family." My father boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden quiet of the plaza. "I'll ruin him. I'll call the papers, ill." "No, Dad," I said, my voice firm, commanding his attention. "Yow'll do nothing. I've already handled it." They both stared at me, confused. "Handled it? Pumpkin, what are you talking about?" "The Vanderbilts believe we are beneath them," I explained, my voice low and intense, for their ears only. "They believe our name, our blood, is not pure enough for their precious lineage. Michael abandoned me because his mother told him I would dilute their legacy." My mother gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. My father's face darkened with a fury that mirrored my own. So I continued, a grim satisfaction in my tone. "I took their legacy away from them. I took their name. I discovered a secret, a lie at the very heart of their family, and I used it. They will be issuing a statement. The wedding is annulled because of their deception, not my abandonment. They will issue a public apology to you for the insult to our family, and within the week they will no longer be Vanderbilts. They will be forced to reclaim their true, far less glamorous family name." My parents were stunned into silence. They looked at their daughter, the artist, the dreamer, now clad in a torn wedding dress and speaking of retribution with the cold precision of a general. They were seeing a part of me that had never existed before this day. Finally, my father spoke, his voice hoarse. "Good God, Olivia." He looked at me, and the anger in his eyes was slowly replaced by a fierce, blazing pride. He pulled me into his arms, and this time I let him. I buried my face in his shoulder, and for a moment, just a moment, I allowed myself to feel the tremors of the day's emotional earthquake. I didn't cry, but a single, dry sob escaped me, a sound of profound loss. We drove home in a strange, tense silence. Sophia rode with us, a silent pillar of support. When we arrived at my parents' house, the place where I had grown up, I went straight to my old room, the wedding dress feeling like a costume I was desperate to shed. I peeled it off, layer by layer, until I was standing in my slip. I let the dress fall into a heap on the floor, the same way I had let the train fall in the church, a discarded skin. I showered, letting the hot water sluice away the scent of roses and failure. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw, trying to wash away the feeling of Michael's last touch, the memory of his promises. Dressed in an old, soft t-shirt and leggings, I felt more myself than I had in months. The bride was gone. Olivia was what remained. For the next few hours, I sat on my bed with my laptop, a cup of tea growing cold beside me. Sophia stayed, silently reading a book in the armchair in the corner, a comforting, unobtrusive presence. I didn't speak. I just typed. I researched property records, shareholder reports, corporate filings. I was building my arsenal, cross-referencing every piece of the Vanderbilt, the Croft empire. The knowledge I held was a weapon, and I intended to be an expert in its use. Just after dusk, my phone buzzed. It was a news alert, and then another, and another. Sophia came over and sat beside me as I clicked on the first link. The headline was stark. VANDRBILTHEIRS, wedding abruptly annulled amidst shocking ALLEGATIONS. My eyes scanned the article. It was there, just as id dictated. A spokesperson for the families confirmed the annulment, citing irreconcilable differences based on the discovery of gross misrepresentation of family heritage. No further details were provided. The wording was a bombshell. The internet was already ablaze with speculation. Misrepresentation? What did they lie about? Was he already married? Is he bankrupt? The narrative was no longer about the poor, jilted artist. It was about the secretive, deceptive Vanderbilts. I had successfully turned their power and fame against them. Their high profile, which had made my humiliation so public, was now the engine of their own downfall. I scrolled through the comments, the tweets, the instant analysis articles. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction. The first part of my plan had been executed flawlessly. Richard had kept his word. His terror was, indeed, a powerful motivator. But as the initial adrenaline of victory began to fade, a different feeling crept in. An emptiness. The rage had been a fire, keeping me warm, keeping me moving. Now, in the quiet of my room with the first battle won, the chill of what I had lost began to seep into my bones. I had loved Michael. It wasn't a lie or a strategy. I had loved his easy laugh, the way he'd listen for hours about my art, the feeling of safety I had in his arms. I had envisioned our whole lives together, children with his blue eyes and my wild hair, growing old in a house filled with books and paintings. I had just destroyed that man, not just his name, but his entire identity. The person he thought he was, the history he took for granted, was gone. I had taken a scalpel to his life and carved out its foundations. Was this justice, or was it just a more elaborate form of destruction? Sophia must have sensed the shift in my mood. She gently took the laptop from my hands and closed it. "That's enough for today," she said softly. "He's a coward, Soph," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "He broke my heart. They insulted my family. They deserved it." I was trying to convince myself as much as her. "Yes, they did," she agreed, her voice firm. "Don't you dare feel guilty. You didn't start this war, Liv. You just finished it." I leaned my head on her shoulder, the exhaustion of the day finally washing over me in a tidal wave. She was right. I hadn't thrown the first stone, but I had thrown the last one and it had brought down a mountain. Now I just had to survive the avalanche. I closed my eyes, waiting for the second statement, the public apology. The humiliation of a leaner Vanderbilt was next on the agenda, and I would be ready. The sun rose on a world that was, for me, fundamentally altered. I had slept in dreamless, leaden exhaustion, but woke with a startling clarity. The grief was a low, persistent hum beneath the surface, but the driving force was a cold, sharp-edged purpose. The battle was not over. It had merely entered a new phase. My phone, which I had left charging on the nightstand, was a minefield. Hundreds of messages, missed calls, and social media notifications. I ignored them all. They were noise, the irrelevant chatter of an audience that had no idea what the play was truly about. I padded downstairs to find my father in the kitchen, a grim expression on his face as he stared at his tablet. He looked up as I entered. "It's everywhere, Liv," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The annulment. They're calling it the Vanderbilt mystery. The speculation is creative." "Let them speculate," I said, pouring myself a coffee. My hands were perfectly steady. The truth is always more interesting than fiction. We didn't have to wait long. Just before 9 a.m., a sleek black car pulled up to the house. A courier, looking nervous and out of place in our quiet, tree-lined street, delivered a thick, expensive-looking envelope. It was addressed to my parents. Inside were advance copies of the day's major newspapers. And there, on page A5 of the most respected national paper, was the second part of my pound of flesh. It was a full-page statement, bordered by a simple, funereal black line. The Vanderbilt corporate logo was at the bottom, small and discreet. The headline was simple, a statement from the Vanderbilt family. The text was a masterpiece of forced humility, every word dripping with the humiliation I had intended. To Dr. Alastair and Mrs. Alina Croft. We, the Vanderbilt family, wish to extend our most sincere and unequivocal apology for the recent events surrounding the annulled marriage of our son, Michael Vanderbilt, and your daughter, Olivia Croft. In the lead up to the ceremony, deeply regrettable and baseless assertions were made regarding the honor and distinction of your family's heritage. These statements were born of ignorance and prejudice, and we wholly disavow them. The Croft name is synonymous with intellectual and artistic achievement, a legacy of earned honor that stands as a testament to generations of brilliance. Any suggestion to the contrary was a grave error in judgment and a profound insult for which we are deeply sorry. We have the utmost respect for you and for your daughter, a woman of extraordinary grace, talent, and integrity. The fault for the dissolution of the union lies with us and our family's internal deceptions, not with her. We humbly ask for your forgiveness for the public and private pain this has caused. Sincerely, Richard Vanderbilt, on behalf of the Vanderbilt family. My mother read it over my father's shoulder, her hand covering her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of vindication. My father folded the newspaper carefully, as if it were a historical document, and placed it on the table. He looked at me, his eyes shining with a pride that was so fierce it almost brought me to my knees. "You did this, Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You defended our name. You did what I, in my anger, could never have accomplished. You used your intelligence as a weapon." "Their greatest weakness," I said, my voice quiet, "was their arrogance. They never imagined the artist had a mind for strategy." The apology had the desired effect. It was a nuclear bomb dropped into the middle of the swirling vortex of gossip. It didn't answer the public's questions, it created 1,000 more. Internal deceptions, what did they lie about? They apologized to her parents. The narrative shifted again. I was no longer just the jilted bride. I was the wronged party in a much larger, more mysterious drama. The power, the moral high ground, was now firmly mine. But I knew Alina. She was a cornered animal, and a cornered animal is at its most dangerous. My victory was too clean, too absolute. Her retaliation was inevitable. I just didn't know what form it would take. It came in the form of a phone call, later that afternoon. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but a premonition, a cold sliver of ice in my gut, told me to answer. "Olivia," the voice was unmistakable. "Michael." It was thin, reedy, stripped of all its former confidence. "There's nothing for us to talk about," I said, my tone flat and final. "Please don't hang up," he begged, and the desperation in his voice was pathetic. I need to understand. My father told me everything. Croft, the name, the whole story, my entire life. It's a lie." "Welcome to the club," I said dryly. "Your family's lies cost me my future. It seems only fair they cost you your past." "Is that what this is about? Revenge?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Because I hurt you, you decided to destroy my entire family. Is that the kind of person you are, Liv?" The accusation, the attempt to reframe his cowardice as my cruelty, ignited the cold embers of my rage back into a roaring flame. "The person I am?" I shot back, my voice dangerously low. "Let's talk about the person you are, Michael. You're a man who stood by and let his mother call my family's legacy impure. You're a man who, instead of fighting for the woman he claimed to love, tucked his tail between his legs and ran, leaving me to face 1,000 people alone. You're a man who broke his sacred vows before they were even spoken. You didn't just hurt me, Michael. You tried to erase me. You and your mother tried to make me a footnote in your grand, fraudulent history. Do not dare to question the kind of person I am. You have no idea what I am capable of." There was a choked sob on the other end of the line. "She got in my head. She threatened things. My inheritance, my position in the company. She said Shed cut me off entirely. She said you'd ruin the bloodline." "And you believed her," I finished for him. "You chose the money. You chose the lie. You made your choice, Michael. Now live with it." "I love you, Liv," he whispered, a desperate last-ditch effort. The words, which once would have sent my heart soaring, now landed with a dull thud. They were meaningless, hollowed out by his actions. "No, you don't," I said, the realization a cold, hard truth in my own heart. "You loved the idea of me. You loved having something that was yours, something outside of your mother's control. But the moment you had to actually fight for it, you folded. That's not love. That's just cowardice with a pretty vocabulary." I ended the call. I blocked his number. It was a final, necessary amputation. The last vestiges of the woman who had loved him, the naive girl in the white dress, died in that conversation. In her place stood someone colder, harder, and infinitely more focused. Sophia, who had been listening from the doorway, came and wrapped her arms around me. "I am so sorry you had to hear that," she murmured. "I am not," I said, pulling away, my eyes dry. "I needed to." The confirmation I needed came the next day. Another news alert, this one from a notorious gossip website known for its venomous, anonymous sources. The headline was slick and suggestive. JILTDBRIDES Revenge? Insiders claim OLIVIACROFTS family history has its own SKELETONS. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and character assassination. It was Aliner's handiwork, I had no doubt. An unnamed source close to the Vanderbilt family painted me as a manipulative social climber who, upon being dumped for instability, had concocted an elaborate and fantastical story to blackmail the family. It hinted at a history of mental illness in my family, twisting my grandfather's eccentric genius into something dark and sinister. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to discredit me, to muddy the waters and reframe the narrative. I read it twice, a cold smile spreading across my face. "Pathetic," I whispered. She was fighting my truth with her lies. It was a battle she was destined to lose. But it did make one thing clear. The statements, the private humiliation, it wasn't enough. Aliner would never stop. She would continue to whisper her poison to anyone who would listen, trying to salvage her tattered pride. As long as the full story remained a secret, she would have room to maneuver, to spin her own version of events. I had tried to contain the fallout. I had tried to handle it with a certain degree of surgical precision, cutting out the tumor without killing the patient. I had given them a chance to manage their own destruction, to control the demolition. But Aliner's little stunt changed the equation. She had made it personal again. She had attacked my family again. She had just signed her own death warrant. "Soph," I said, turning to my friend, my eyes burning with a new, unholy fire. "I need you to find me the name of the best investigative journalist in this country. Not a gossip columnist. A real one. Someone who tears down corporations and topples politicians. Someone who lives to uncover the truth and is not afraid of a fight." Sophia looked at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Liv, what are you going to do?" "Aliner wants to fight this in the press." "Fine," I said, picking up my laptop. "Let's give them a real story. I am done with veiled statements and quiet legal petitions." I looked at the crumpled newspaper on the table, at the carefully worded apology. It was a shield, but I didn't need a shield anymore. I needed a sword. "I'm going to burn their whole world to the ground," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And I'm going to make sure everyone is watching when I light the match." My war of attrition was over. It was time for scorched earth. Finding the right weapon took 48 hours. Sophia, with the relentless efficiency of a true friend on a mission, came through with a name: Julian Croft. A Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist notorious for his deep dives into corporate malfeasance and the hidden sins of the ultra-wealthy. His last exposé had led to the dissolution of a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company that had falsified drug trial data. He was a shark, and the Vanderbilt, now Croft, family was bleeding in the water. I met him not in a sterile office, but in my own studio. I wanted him to see me in my element, surrounded by my work, by the truth of who I was. I didn't want to be the jilted bride in a torn dress. I wanted to be the artist, the narrator, the one who held the brush. Julian Croft was a man in his late 50s, with tired eyes that had seen too much and a cynical twist to his mouth. He listened, impassive, as I laid out the whole story, from the first condescending tea with Aliner to Michael's final, pathetic phone call. I showed him the photo from the album, the inscription on the back, the public records I had gathered, and the newspaper with the public apology. I handed him a printed copy of the gossip column piece, Aliner's clumsy attempt at a counterattack. He read everything in silence, his expression unreadable. When he was done, he looked up at me, his gaze sharp and analytical. "They gave you everything you demanded," he stated, not as a question. "The annulment, the public apology. The legal process for the name change has been filed. I checked this morning. You won. Why come to me now? Why burn it all down when you already have your victory?" Because she came after my family again, I said, my voice quiet but laced with steel. She tried to paint my grandfather's genius as madness. She called me unstable. She thinks that because the whole truth isn't public, she can still control the narrative in the shadows. She thinks she can whisper away her humiliation. I don't just want a victory, Mr. Croft. I want a surrender. I want to salt the earth so that nothing of their arrogance can ever grow again. A slow smile spread across Julian's face, transforming his cynical features. It was the smile of a predator that had just caught the scent of its favorite prey. Most people I deal with are motivated by greed or fear. But revenge is the purest motivation of all. It makes for the best stories. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. You understand that if we do this, there's no going back. Your life, your privacy will be collateral damage. They will paint you as a villain, a black widow. Are you prepared for that? A villain is just a victim who decided to fight back, I replied. They tried to make me a tragedy. I'd rather be the monster. For the next week, my studio became a war room. Julian and his team of researchers descended, fact-checking every detail, corroborating every claim. They were relentless, digging into land deeds from the 1800s, tracking down the distant, forgotten relatives of the original Vanderbilt family to confirm Augustus had no direct heirs. They unearthed Harrison Croft's will, a document full of legal loopholes that hinted at the desperation to pass his fortune to his illegitimate son. The story was even better than I had realized. The cover-up wasn't just a simple name change. It was a complex web of fraud, bribery, and forged documents that spanned decades. As the publication date neared, a strange calm settled over me. I had set a sequence of events in motion that I could no longer control. The bomb was built, the timer was set, and all I could do was wait for the explosion. There were moments, late at night, when the ghost of Michael would visit me. I'd remember the feel of his hand in mine, the sound of his laugh. A profound sadness would wash over me, the grief for a future that had been stolen. But then I would remember the humiliation, the coldness in his final note, his mother's sneering face, and the sadness would recede, leaving behind the hard, cold certainty of my purpose. He had made his choice. This was the consequence. The story broke on a Sunday morning, on the front page of the digital and print editions of the nation's most respected newspaper. The headline was devastatingly simple: The House of Croft, How a Stolen Name Built a Modern Empire. It was a masterpiece of journalistic destruction. Julian had woven the narrative together perfectly, contrasting the Vanderbilts' public image of old money purity with the sordid, secret truth of their origins. My photograph of Amelia Croft and her infant son was the centerpiece, her defiant eyes staring out at the world, a century-old ghost come to claim her due. The story had everything: sex, betrayal, lies, and a powerful family's fall from grace. And at the heart of it was me, the jilted bride who had uncovered it all. Julian, true to his word, portrayed me not as a vindictive ex-fiancé, but as the catalyst, an unwilling agent of a truth that had been buried for too long. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By the time the stock market opened on Monday morning, Vanderbilt, now publicly known as Croft, consolidated stock was in freefall. The name, their primary asset, was now a liability, a symbol of fraud. Billions were wiped from their market value within hours. The board of directors, a group of powerful men who valued their reputations above all else, called an emergency meeting. The social ramifications were just as brutal. The carefully constructed world of galas, charity boards, and exclusive clubs that a leaner Vanderbilt had ruled with an iron fist slammed its doors in her face. Invitations were rescinded. Phone calls went unreturned. The families they had once looked down upon now looked at them with a mixture of pity and scorn. They weren't just disgraced, they had become a punchline. I watched it all unfold from the quiet sanctuary of my studio, the news alerts on my phone a steady drumbeat of their demise. Richard Vanderbilt was forced to step down as CEO. The company would be rebranded, restructured, but the damage was irreparable. The Vanderbilt name, once a synonym for power, was now a synonym for shame. Late that night, there was a frantic pounding on my studio door. I knew who it was before I saw him through the peephole: Michael. He looked like a ghost, his face pale and haggard, his clothes disheveled. He looked broken. I opened the door, but blocked his entry with my body. "How could you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "How could you do this to us?" "To us," I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "There is no us, Michael. You made that choice at the altar. I am not a we, I am a me. And you are the one who did this to your family. You with your weakness, your father with his secrets, your mother with her hate. I just turned on the lights. It's not my fault you were all cockroaches." Tears streamed down his face. "My mother, she's had a complete breakdown. She won't leave her room. My father, he looks like he's aged 20 years. Our lives are over, Liv. Are you happy now? Is this what you wanted?" I looked at him, at the man I had once loved with every fiber of my being, and I felt nothing. The love was gone, burned away by the fire of his betrayal. The anger was gone, sated by the totality of my victory. All that was left was a vast, cold emptiness. "What I wanted was a husband who loved me enough to stand up for me," I said, my voice soft but final. "What I wanted was a life with you. You took that from me. Everything that has happened since is just the receipt for what you bought with your cowardice. Now, I want you to leave. I want you to go live in the truth you were all so desperate to hide from. And I want you to never, ever speak to me again." I closed the door on his tear-streaked face, the sound of the lock clicking into place a final, definitive end. I leaned against the door, the wood cool against my back, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I took a deep, shuddering breath. It was over. The empire was in ashes. The name was erased. The lineage, the one Aliner had been so desperate to keep pure, was now irrevocably stained, not by my blood, but by their own lies. I walked over to the largest canvas in my studio, a vast, empty expanse of white. I picked up a palette knife and a tube of black paint. My hands, which had been so steady signing legal documents and sending damning emails, now trembled with a different kind of energy. It wasn't the tremor of fear or sadness. It was the tremor of creation. The story the world knew was one of revenge, the jilted bride who had toppled an empire. But they didn't know the real story. The real story was about a woman who had been forced to burn down her own fairy tale to find the truth of who she was. I was not the bride in the white dress, nor the avenging angel in the headlines. I was the artist. I squeezed a dollop of black paint onto the canvas, and then another, until a chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying new form began to emerge from the pristine white. It was a picture of a fire, of a burning castle, and of a woman walking away from the flames, her face illuminated not by the destruction behind her, but by the dawning of a new day that was entirely her own. I had lost a future I thought I wanted, but I had gained a future I had earned. And it was mine, built not on a stolen name, but on the unshakable foundation of my own truth.